The National Basketball Association, or NBA, is a mainstay in American sports. Today, on average, about 3 million fans tune into every game to watch players like LeBron James, Stephen Curry, and Kevin Durant dominate the court. But go back 70 years, and these players wouldn't have been allowed in the league.
The NBA was segregated for 3 years, from 1947 to 1950. In 1950, the NBA drafted Earl Lloyd from West Virginia State College, and then they drafted 4 of the great players: Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, Oscar Robertson, Elgin Baylor, 4 African-American men that were very prominent in building the NBA.
That's Ray Scott, a former NBA player, coach, and author of The NBA in Black and White. Growing up, Scott thought his dreams of playing professionally would never take shape because of the color of his skin. Back then, black players could only play on teams known as the Black Fives, which were not officially recognized as part of the NBA. For Scott, black players finally getting drafted in 1950 meant that he had a shot to make it to the main stage. And he did.
I was drafted in 1961 into the NBA after never even thinking that I would be drafted particularly prominently into the NBA.
But even after the NBA desegregated, it took nearly 10 years for black players to have an equal chance at getting recruited. Why the delay?
North Carolina, Duke, Alabama, Auburn, all of those schools, African-American kids couldn't attend. So coming through the 60s, that was beginning to happen. And so consequently, the NBA, because it was a league that was constructed of All-Americans, kids that made All-American in college or that were prominent in high school and became prominent in college. That was who was drafted into the NBA.
Once these universities desegregated, a greater number of black players began to get drafted into the NBA in the 60s. While Scott and other athletes were rising up through the sport during this time, it was a different reality for the average black American.
That 60s period was so tumultuous because my career as a 16-year-old in high school was paralleled with the murder of Emmett Till in 1955 in Mississippi. And this is simply a young 14-year-old kid that was accused of some dastardly deed.
Till's horrific murder acted as a catalyst for the emerging civil rights movement. This key political fight demanded an end to racial segregation and discrimination. While the NBA on paper was desegregated, black athletes still faced these same hurdles. The attitudes present across America bled into the league as black players endured harassment and heckling on and off the court. When playing in southern states, they couldn't eat or stay at the same places as their white teammates. Across the league, there were also rumors of teams having an unofficial quota of 4 black players per roster. Despite these challenges, Scott continued to push forward in his career. His tenure as a player spanned from 1961 to 1972 as a member of the Detroit Pistons, Baltimore Bullets, and the Virginia Squires. After his retirement, Scott became the head coach of the Pistons and went on to win Coach of the Year in 1974. In fact, he was the first black man ever to be honored with this award.
It forced me to take a look back on how I became, or how I came to come to such an honor, because I was a kid from South Philly, a third floor walk-up, had left me standing at midcourt before 10 or 11,000 fans at Cobo Hall in Detroit, wondering how I got to this position in my life, how so many people had intervened and helped me and supported me to become a player, to stay out of trouble, to go to school. It just leaves you just standing at midcourt thinking about all these things. And I remember the commissioner, the deputy commissioner, Cy Gordine, asked me if I had any words. And I said no, because I had to go out and coach right after that against the Chicago Bulls in a playoff series. So I certainly wasn't thinking about how honored and how thrilled I was at that time.
Now, off the court and looking back, Scott says that receiving this title was the highlight of his NBA career. The irony is not lost on him that the NBA went from a segregated league to now, almost 80 years later, a landscape in which its highest paid and most prominent players are black. Scott says the league has shown through its actions that it's able to look inwards and change.
I think the other leagues, particularly the NFL, because that's our number one sport in the country, can learn some things. I write in the book about Colin Kaepernick and how, he was just blackballed out of football. And I don't even think he has a career left. But we had a kid in the NBA who changed his name and became Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. Mahmoud was suspended for not standing for the national anthem. He was brought to the table. Let's talk about this. He was reinstated back into the NBA and had a 7 or 8 year career because we chose to talk about it. We chose to look at it from his perspective. What is it that he's thinking? What is it that he's feeling? And the NBA charged straight ahead, and this kid played out his career.
The NBA awarded $25 million to former players of the ABA, the American Basketball Association, a separate league that ran from 1967 to 1976.
The NBA had a league begin called the ABA, the ones with the red, white, and blue ball. And so I played in that league for 2 years. And the guys that played in that league played extremely hard. They did what they could do to bring this league to fruition. But after 10 years, the league folded. And so you were left with 150 to about 200 players that if they weren't absorbed into the NBA, and 4 teams were, then what do these guys do?
At a time when discrimination ran rampant and the NBA was still predominantly white, the ABA was where many black players were able to play professionally. After its demise, many of these athletes who were not picked up by the NBA left basketball. In recent years, it's come to light that many former ABA players have fallen into poverty and homelessness. After hearing this, NBA players, coaches, and personnel stepped up.
They awarded those players in the ABA, and there will be 114 of them, which will receive at least now $11,000 a year. Not all the money in the world, but it's more than they had before this happened. Through that meeting, they got $25 million awarded to them. And that will make an incredible difference to these gentlemen.
While this is one positive narrative, there's always room for change. Why did it take so long for these players to get compensated for the discrimination they faced back in the 60s? Scott says it's these conversations that move the needle forward.
When you bring people to the table and you respect their position and they respect yours, you can arrive somewhere, you can get somewhere. And that's what I believe in the book that I wrote. That's what I believe about the NBA.
To find out more about Ray Scott, visit viewpointsradio.org. You can find his book, The NBA in Black and White, on Amazon.com or request copies to be stocked at your local bookstore. For more behind the scenes, check out Viewpoints Radio on Twitter and Facebook. This segment was written and produced by Grace Galante. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price.